Is there any benefit to looking at the history of education? Or should we just be focused on what we're doing today and where we're headed in the future? This episode of Back Porch Education looks at the value of a history of education.
Get your education. Back Porch Education.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Steve, that intro that I always do is from a T.S. Eliot poem. Did you know that?
Yes, of course, he's my great-grandfather, even though he spelled his name wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm familiar with Eliot. What is that from? Is that from Proofrock?
I think it is from Proofrock. Why did you ask me that? This will, of course, be edited out. No, the evenings, mornings, afternoons, I measure my life in coffee spoons. Yeah, that's Proofrock.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So
you bring up T.S. Eliot because that then smells like a poem is coming.
Well, it's not Frost. Don't say it with an attitude like
it's an Eliot. No. This is exciting.
Yeah, there we go. We need you to be chipper.
All right then.
So, in terms of being chipper, we'll see if we get chipper by the end. I think no, but maybe.
From me or from the other Eliot? It's a question.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to get it out of him, so you're going to really need to carry it for us.
All right.
This poem is entitled, "Why Should Men Love the Church?" And I'll allow myself only this comment. I think that it is directly applicable. This question, at least, is directly applicable to the question that we're trying to answer today. Okay?
All right.
So here is T.S. Eliot's "Why Should Men Love the Church?" It is hard for those who have never known persecution and who have never known a Christian to believe these tales of Christian persecution. It is hard for those who live near a bank to doubt the security of their money. It is hard for those who live near a police station to believe in the triumph of violence. Do you think that the faith has conquered the world and that lions no longer need keepers? Do you need to be told that whatever has been can still be? Do you need to be told that even such modest attainments as you boast of in the way of polite society will hardly survive the faith to which they owe their significance? Men, polish your teeth on rising and retiring. Women, polish your fingernails. You polish the tooth of the dog and the talon of the cat. Why should men love the church? Why should they love her laws? She tells them of life and death, and of all that they would forget. She is tender where they would be hard, and hard where they would like to be soft. She tells them of evil and sin, and other unpleasant facts. They constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. But the man that is will shadow the man that pretends to be. And the Son of Man is crucified always, and there shall be martyrs and saints. And if blood of martyrs is to flow on the steps, we must first build the steps. And if the temple is to be cast down, we must first build the temple.
Well, happy and cheery it is not, but boy, that's a solid poem right there.
Isn't that a good one? I will not do you the great disservice of asking you to translate or interpret my reading of that. But yeah,
well, he took me somewhere.
It's fascinating. Okay.
right? A
Yeah.
poet's supposed to take you somewhere. And he took me to Lewis's notion of why we should read outside our own time,
Perfect.
right?
Yep.
Lewis says that we already reflect our own time,
Mm-hmm.
right? People writing within our context
Mm-hmm.
get us and we get them, and what they have to say is important because it confirms who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But Eliot here is saying the church, and I believe he means the church past, the tradition of the church.
Yeah. Capital
Um,
C.
yeah, the church as the faith as handed down to us
Yeah.
through the working of
Tradition.
the Spirit, right? The
Mm-hmm.
working of the Spirit for the last 2,000 years has provides us with a service we desperately need that we do not want,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
it tells us the way things are. She tells them of evil and sin and other unpleasant facts. They constantly try to escape,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And there's an unrest in the human soul, in particular with itself, that's always seeking out that new idea,
Yeah.
that Shangri-La, that turn of the corner in which we'll finally see it right.
Yeah.
And in this poem, Lewis, saying, yeah, well, while you're out there looking for that, don't forget that mankind's well known by the church.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It has a clear eye as to who you and I are, and it will tell us things we don't really want to know.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it gives
So.
us wisdom. It gives us truth, and
Mhm.
we need that.
Right. I'm so happy that you went to Lewis here because the same thought came to mind as I was reading it. This notion of chronological snobbery, right? Which
Yeah.
I'm not a Lewis fanatic. I've read some of his stuff, but not all of it. But I think that he introduces that concept in his introduction to Athanasius's On the Incarnation, which is fantastic. Everybody, go read it. But
Yeah, both
Steve,
his
did
introduction
we
and
just
that
talk
book.
ourselves? Did we just talk ourselves into a have you read?
Yeah.
Perhaps we
Perhaps.
have. Yeah, but getting back to Eliot, yeah, this is the chronological snobbery that is all too easy for us to fall into. Is counterbalanced by the church, who will tell us of all that we would forget, right? Um, the other thing that to me really stuck out this time reading it through, Eliot says, the man that is will shadow the man that pretends to be, right? And that sounds to me like a famous sort of Latin phrase, esse quam videri, which incidentally is the slogan of North Carolina, the state slogan. But it means to be rather than to seem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The being is more important than the seeming. And so while we want to seem a certain way, the church knows us not as we would want to seem, but as we are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's horrible, and also just exactly what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the quote, and I do believe that he initially used the term chronological snobbery in his introduction to Athanasius,
Okay.
but he brings it up as well in another context when he's surprised at his own chronological snobbery. In
Okay.
Surprised by Joy, his sort of
Yeah.
biographical account of how he came to know to be a professing Christian,
Okay.
because he was atheistic in his early years as
Right.
a professor.
Right.
And I've pulled up the quote because it meant a lot to me when Surprised by Joy was a big book for me when I read through it.
Mm-hmm.
It says, here were gods, spirits, afterlife, and pre-existence initiates, occult knowledge, meditation. He's almost spitting these words out. There's all
Yeah.
this old stuff.
Yeah.
Why, damn it, it's medieval, I exclaimed. For I still had all the chronological snobbery of my period and used the names of earlier periods as terms of abuse. Here was everything which the new look had been designed to exclude. Everything that might lead one off the main road into those dark places where men were wallowing on the floor and screamed that they were being dragged down into hell. Of course, it was all arrant nonsense. There was no danger of my being taken in. But that's it. He recognizes in himself that mistake. So I think the point that he's making is that even in his own life, he needed to recognize that he has a tendency anytime he looks back to belittle. We've moved beyond that. He recognized the progressive spirit that says we're only onward and upward, which of course was a whole movement in American history, right? The progressive movement was a pretty strong thing at the end of the 19th century, but it hit the rough road of World War One.
Yeah, sure.
And they even changed the way we talked about I don't know if you remember this or not, but they referred to World War One as the steam release valve, right? The war to end all wars. Mankind had, by its terrible, violent love affair with the old, worked itself up to such a fringe that it was going to have to fight this one world war that then would bring in the truly progressive. After that, everything would be fine, except a few short years later, there's World War II.
Wow.
And so as a political movement, progressivism really took a tough hit. But my assertion for today's podcast is that it's the progressive notion is a part of the warp and woof of our thinking today, and not without good reason.
Right.
My refrigerator is a whole lot better than my mother's first refrigerator.
That's right.
My father was born into a house without running water or electricity. I was not.
Yeah.
And my children would call that child abuse.
Yeah. Right.
I'm all for the comforts and the conveniences and the efficiencies, the good things that come from technological advancement, progress, if that's how you want to label the term progress. But there's Lewis, Eliot, and many others are warning us not to turn our backs on the past, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. As as you're talking about this idea, I remember one of my buddies once said, "The world is getting better all the time, and the world is getting worse all the time." Right? That it isn't just a sort of one of them, right? But these things are happening simultaneously and constantly, and so we want to acknowledge the good that is arising, the progress, right? Be it technological or otherwise, because the church hasn't sat on her hands for 2,000 years, right?
Right.
She has certainly progressed. But at the same time, we want to acknowledge the detriment, the fall, technological or otherwise, right? There's a lot of baggage that comes along with all these new machines that we keep convincing ourselves are so good. And so, yeah, I'm firmly in the camp of both of these things are happening. Good, yes, absolutely. Worse, yes, absolutely.
Right, it's human experience, right? That often in our attempt to make it better, the unintended consequences of our actions bring about some aspect that while you can point over here where our focus was, see how much better it is,
right?
A slight turn of the head, and we suddenly realize, oh, but over here we've kind of made it worse.
Yep.
I think down through the ages, many would have almost killed for the amount of discretionary time we have today, in large part because of labor-saving devices.
Yep.
Right. I've done my laundry by hand, and I've done it in a laundry machine, and I recognize the sincere difference in time saved, effort saved, and final result, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But uh, uh, and and I have no qual. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying that intrinsically less technology is better. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that. I'm
Right.
saying that in something like education, for instance, we have a bad notion of thinking anything done in the past was less enlightened than what
Hmm.
we're doing now, and that whatever, I'm 30 years into my teaching. There are many who would say, you're old school.
Sure.
You started teaching way back when. Hey, I use a 60-inch monitor and a iPad
Hmm.
instead of the chalkboard, and
Hmm.
we'll put a definition of that into the notes for those of you
Yeah, yeah.
too young to remember what a chalkboard is. But and I'm thankful that I don't walk around getting laughs from my students because I got a big chalky handprint on my butt,
Right.
like I used to have, right?
Right.
But I miss the chalk eraser that had enough heft to it. I mean, I still have a whiteboard eraser, but those things are so wimpy.
Uh-huh.
The chalk eraser had heft to it, and you could, and it had an explosive power to it, so that if you sailed that
For
puppy across the
discipline.
room,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
a sleeping student knocked on the head with the felt eraser and a little poof of white chalk
Yeah.
was very gratifying, not only for me, but for
Sure.
all the students who were awake.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Not to mention, long term, it produced fruit in the sleeping student. It, gave him a
Yeah.
better education. But anyway, I jest. But
Right.
I,
Kinda.
I, well, there are things given up
Yeah.
every time something is new comes along.
Hmm.
And most of the time we count the costs, if we are aware of what all the costs are, we count them and justify or come to the conclusion that it's worth. This new thing is going to be more better than worse, if that
Right.
makes sense. The mathematics work for us, the mathematics of progress.
Hmm.
And I'm not trying to record a podcast that's against that. I'm kind of the both and kind of guy that's saying,
Hmm.
as exciting as some of the new ideas in education are, let's not dismiss out of hand prejudicially
Hmm.
say anything from the past is just long since gone and irrelevant.
Right.
Um, I can apply it in so many different routes. I don't want to get real specific. I like the general idea we're developing that the past has benefit, and I think that it's even beneficial enough to study. Because in particular, living in this sort of snobbish, chronologically snobbish world, I don't think enough is being made. Even 30 years ago, when I was in college, taking a degree in education, my history of educational philosophy was one of the driest, uh,
Hmm.
poorly taught courses, and I'm not going to call names or anything,
Sure.
but the obviously the amount of material is difficult to cover in a semester course. But I sometimes felt like she didn't even try.
Hmm.
she just
Yeah.
she just droned through this stuff because the I remember people saying, "Well, this is the only time I'm ever going to need to know this stuff going into the test." It was that get it down on the
Which is
test
a
and forget it.
tremendously sad attitude to hear out of students for that class in particular, right?
Well, I put some of the burden on the teacher. I don't think she had demonstrated to us a persuasive thesis.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
more like you have to take this class to get your degree, but none of us think it's important.
Right. Okay, good. So pause right there. Are we going to get a better thesis? Are we going to get a better, more persuasive statement when it comes to understanding or the case for studying the history of education?
Yeah,
Right.
well, so
Whatever your, like, I think you said, whatever your sort of particular favorite is for the moment, it has roots running back through uh, the history of, in our case, education.
Right. So I think that the history of ideas is way more powerful than just the history of names, dates, and places.
Right.
So
Right.
the names, dates, and places are simply the means by which we keep track of the progress of the ideas. So to me, going back and studying how the Greeks, for instance, sort of invented Western education,
Hmm.
how the Romans changed it, improved it, and passed on in particular to Christianity when it
Right.
adopts Christianity as its state church, so to speak,
Hmm.
official
Hmm.
religion, and then brings in, the long line of great Christian thinkers, Alfred the Great, Augustine, probably not going to be chronologically correct here, but Aquinas, uh,
Everybody starts with A, right?
yeah,
Augustine, Aquinas, uh,
Alfred,
Abelard,
yeah, there you go. So
Averroes.
Averroes, yes, yeah.
There are
Uh,
more. There are more, but
there
I'm
are
drawing
more.
blanks.
Individually, they're interesting, but as a group of people who have passed batons to each other,
Hmm. Hmm.
Homer kind of starting an argument or a discussion about what true education is and what it results in and what kind of a man it will construct, and then just I have to Socrates, Plato, Aristotle are the dudes, right? And if you
Hmm.
ignore them, you either have to reinvent the wheel they already made, which
Hmm.
seems inefficient,
Right.
uh, sort of like Atlas, perhaps, um, or you're what's the can I use the term dismembered? You
Okay.
you you're attempting to do things without knowing how they where they came from or how they've been used. Um, yeah, I guess it is the reinvention of the wheel is all I'm trying to
Well,
say. But
sort of appeal. You can appeal, I think, to the scientific mindset, right, in which we live, and say, um, look, they had their experience of education. That's data that you don't have unless you seek it out.
yep,
So, you know, uh, we modern people who are so hopped up on data, we don't know what to do without it or what to do with anything else. Um, I think there you could couch their experiences as data, and therefore sort of make it imbue it with a certain value just by the fact by virtue of the fact that it's data, right?
right. Well, and even the scientific enterprise is dependent upon ground zero assumptions.
Hmm.
There
Hmm.
is or isn't a God. There
Right.
is or isn't order to the universe. There is or is not laws governing that universe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of
More
these.
data is accurate than less data,
Right,
right?
well, and I still have to interpret the data, and thus the
Right.
the interpretive principles that I'm using. Right. So when I look at the history of education, it
Hmm.
it it curves with the philosophical theological curve of human existence. Right. And so I
Yes.
start having more things to argue with an educator about after the Enlightenment than before it,
Okay.
because a big part of Enlightenment thinking was this refocusing away from a sort of theological, a theocentric view of the world to more of a man-centered view,
Right. Hmm.
and that changes education,
Totally.
right? I just recently talking with my sophomores, their last book this year, for technological reasons. I'll tell the story. So normally we show up to class, and at the end of my medieval literature class, the sophomores would first read Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe,
Sure.
and then right after that, Swift's Gulliver's Travels,
Okay.
published 7 years after Robinson Crusoe.
That's right.
And Swift was pretty clear about the fact that he was trying to argue against the general optimism of mankind that Defoe had pictured in Robinson Crusoe.
Mm-hmm.
and trying to show that man's a much more messed up creature. And and then we were talking about the fact that a whole bunch of other works, Swiss Family Robinson, what's the famous kids book, Moonstone, was written, and in there is one of the narrators feels he almost treats Robinson Crusoe as though it were a Bible or a spiritual text, and he's constantly
Mm-hmm.
quoting from it and whatnot. My point that I was making to the students was that some great idea will captivate generations, but
Mm-hmm.
rarely do they just carry it straight. Each generation puts its curve on it, right?
Right. For instance, one person who is certainly significant in the history of education who used Robinson Crusoe extensively was Rousseau,
Oh yeah,
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right?
Emile, right? The only
Yeah,
book he'd let Emile read before the age of 12
yeah,
was Robin. He wanted him to be a Robinson Crusoe,
yep.
right? Independent and figuring
Like
out all
sort of
his own
his
problems,
version of what Robinson Crusoe is, right?
right?
He
From his
he
point
he
of view,
doesn't
and
even need the whole book.
right, it's sort of you see how he learned. That's how I would like Emile to learn. What is
Right.
my problem today? How am I going to solve it? Use my own creativity. Forget about some curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Life is the curriculum,
Right.
and that was and Rousseau, of course. We have to do. Have you met Jean-Jacques Rousseau sometime?
That's a
But
good that's a good thought.
Rousseau, in many regards, was a very radical turn in
Mm-hmm.
how educators approached
Mm-hmm.
the nature of the student they were teaching, and that changes everything, right? If
Definitely.
you if you think this is the purpose of teaching and it's radically different than the teachers you had, then you're going to teach differently. And
Yep.
and he was pretty adamant, to not repeat the terrible mistakes, especially of the Christian past.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm worried about is going back to your idea of the collection of data.
Mm-hmm.
2,000 years of 2,500 years of teaching in the Western tradition has made some pretty glorious mistakes along the way, which is
Yeah.
what science is interested in,
Absolutely.
right? I've thought to myself on many occasions, with all the money in STEM these days and all the money in science, there's
Mm-hmm.
got to be some frustrated bean counters who are going, we poured millions into this and it failed. you know,
Right.
Meanwhile, the scientists are dancing around with champagne because they have proved a null hypothesis that's the key. Now we know where to go. Now that
Mm-hmm.
that failed, we know it's not that way. This has got to be it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But mistakes excite scientists.
Right.
Mistakes
The work goes on.
mistakes seem almost criminal to many educators because we're dealing with children and we're dealing with lives here. And I agree that you don't want to purposely mess them up. But I also observe that education seems infatuated with the experiment. It's
Yeah.
never it's never at ease. There's always this new idea. And I could get cynical and attach that to money because every time a new idea comes along, then there's new curriculum and new standardized tests and new consulting and new training and professional development and all it is. It's a big cash cow. But I'm not cynical. I don't think that they're just changing in order to keep the gravy train going. I think people are constantly seeking new ideas in education, and that's not wrong.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's scary to me is if you forget all that we've learned from the past, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. So I think that's right. I think that a desire for something new. The argument that I'm hoping to make is don't snuff out that desire for something new, but just realize that there are a great number of things available that are new to you that have already been tried, right, in the history of education.
Yep.
And by studying that sort of history, it enables us to, I think, not only amass knowledge, but also wisdom as we are testing out what is the best way to educate a child. It's no easy task, but we're not the first ones to do it.
Yeah. Well, and the confidence that comes with that, not the false confidence, but true confidence,
Mm-hmm.
assurance that what I'm doing is based upon sound past practice.
Right.
And I'm not, this is back to the Lewis quote. There's no danger of my being taken in. If I've studied the past and this quote unquote new idea comes along, which is often just a rehashing of some long since forgotten past idea.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear it and I go, oh, 500 years ago, that was a new idea too.
Yeah.
To someone who's never studied anything beyond his own lifetime, it's all new, right? And to the student of history, whatever kind of history we're talking about, and today we're talking about educational history, but philosophical history, theological history is a big deal to me. That I've spent a lot of my life studying the past and trying to love the church, as Eliot said in the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a repository of wisdom. There's a lot of work by the Holy Spirit to reveal truth to men there, if I'll go but find it. Years later, when I pulled out that old notebook that had all of this massive outline from that lady I was referring to earlier, it was pretty boring. It was kind of like discovering gold in your closet, because
I bet.
now that I've been teaching for a while, it produced in me a much different set of questions. As a novice who had never really taught much at all in my college experience, I didn't even know what the questions were. I was going to go teach, and it was going to be cool, and my kids were going to love me, and the lessons were going to be awesome. And then you get out there and you hit the reality of things. Now I got some questions. And that's one of the beauties of almost any kind of passionate pursuit, is there is a history to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like we talked about here recently in another episode about my newfound passion for smoking meats, Offset Smoker has a history to it. And that's part of the fun of this newfound passion of mine, is getting an education on where it came from, how it's been used, what mistakes others have made, so I don't waste preciously expensive meat making those same mistakes. I'm trying to work off their wisdom, not have to learn it all over again myself.
That's right.
I think that's what we're trying to say.
Good deal. So I don't think I'm going to be able to summarize it any better than that. That there is a rich history, and studying that rich history enriches your experience of what you're doing in the present.
And there's so many different ways to go about it. So if you teach a particular subject, inevitably you can find histories of that subject, of how it's changed over the years, how it's been taught successfully and unsuccessfully. And then there's more general works that are more like a history book that just cover education generally, sometimes in specific time periods, and sometimes, like I said, trying to make a survey of Western civilization or even all of world history, which is a big task if you think about it. But one of those resources that we'll just mention is something that we're excited about with Back Porch Education, and that is the Side Porch, where slowly, because we're working men, Jason and I are from time to time going to have something that we don't feel right trying to cram into a 30-minute podcast. And we don't want to make a series of podcasts where, if you're not interested in the subject, you have to, if you're binge listening to this podcast, you have to work your way through 6 episodes of this subject. So we're kind of limiting ourselves to 1 episode for a subject. But one of the things that I'm passionate about, if it hasn't revealed itself yet, is the history of education. And so not too long ago, I sat down with my microphone and a whole bunch of notes and just kind of thought through. I started with the Greeks and just thought and talked my way through. They're cut up into small sections, but it's a marathon. Yep. And the Side Porch,
there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's about 8 hours. But isn't available when you go looking for it. Be patient. The Side Porch is coming soon. And it's going to have some other things as well, projects that we want to work on, that aren't a part of this regular podcast. So if you don't see it, inquire, and we'll try and give you some sense of when it might be up. But it's coming soon, and hopefully not too long after this episode makes its way public, you'll start seeing not just back porch, but the side porch off to one side that offers some things. And who knows, might even have a coffee mug or something like that that you can pick up for yourself to remember us by when you're waking up in the morning or whatnot.
Yeah, you're going to need, if you try and do all 8 hours in one day, you're going to need some coffee or something.
Yeah.
Although it is fascinating. I mean, it is wonderful stuff. And so, yeah, this is our latest attempt at trying something new, progress, innovation, right? But whether or not you partake in the sort of side porch, which in my opinion is well worth it. There are other resources too, right? Maru has his history of education, an absolute slog. It is a long book on the history of education, but well worth it.
Yep, very important to my understanding of things.
Yeah, and
American
go ahead.
educational history. Diane Ravitch.
Yes.
Did a wonderful job. Left Back, which focuses. It is. She starts with colonial America and shows in particular what happens when the government gets involved in education and standardized testing.
Cool.
She has another work that specifically focuses on standardized testing and its effect over the years, where it came from, how it got developed, and what its effect has been on education. So I find her as a contemporary. She's still out there writing stuff. I want to say she writes for the New York Times. I think that's right.
She's big. She's big time.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that we have in our time somebody that still sees the value of doing the research. All of her books are incredibly sourced, and long bibliographies and whatnot, which is, that's part of the deal, right? That's about the only part of Wikipedia that I really get into, is I go to the end and find out, well, where did this person source the material from? And I'm going to go read that. Yeah. And I'm probably mostly going to go read its bibliography. And sooner or later, they get me back to the primary sources that I really want to get to. So
Right. But they're helpful, in sort of giving you a wide swath so that you can see where you want to focus your time and attention.
Get your education. Backward education. You can't have your meat if you don't eat your vegetables.